FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Today's show is brought to you by Blue Sky Uranium Corporation. Blue Sky has first mover advantage in Argentina in the world's newest uranium and vanadium district. With an existing near-surface deposit that's open for expansion, Blue Sky also controls a massive district-scale land package with mineralization along a 145-kilometer-long trend. Blue Sky possesses tremendous exploration upside and is an excellent leverage play on rising uranium and vanadium prices. The company is run by a best-in-class management and technical team with proven exploration and development success in Argentina. Blue Sky Uranium trades under the ticker symbol BSK on the Toronto Venture Exchange and as BKUCF on the OTC. For more information and to stay on top of the latest news, go to blueskyuranium.com. That's blueskyuranium.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. It's 3/27/19, almost done with March. Hey, price of gold down a few bucks today, $4 or $5 the ounce. Not sure where it's heading right now. Could be going below 1,300 again. Just buckle your seatbelts. Buy on weakness, probably the best thing to do here. Anyways, don't put all your eggs in one basket and don't buy everything all at once. That's what we tell you here. Hey, freedom. Is it eroding? Is it gone? No one thing symbolized freedom for Americans than the automobile. You could go where you wanted to go, when you want to go there, however fast you could get away with without getting a speeding ticket. It's freedom. And now it looks like autonomous vehicles and other technology trying to deprive you of your God-given right to traverse the highways to wherever and whenever you want to go. Hey, as always, if you got an opinion on this or anything else, email us, kl@kerrylutz.com. We love when you participate in the show. Well, Eric Peters bills himself as the libertarian car guy. You find him at ericpetersautos.com. That's ERIC petersautos.com. Eric, welcome back. And hey, what of technology, the government using it to try to restrict your freedom of personal mobility? Is there something wrong with this picture?
Well, first, thanks for having me back. Always enjoy being a guest. And I think we probably should start the conversation with some editorial correction. You hear it referred to as autonomous cars a lot, and they're not autonomous. Autonomous is a synonym for independent, free of control, and these things are the farthest from being independent of control. The control is taken away from you, the driver and the owner, and placed in the hands of whomever controls the programming and the software of the car. So getting to this issue of our freedoms being under assault, I can think of nothing that represents more of an assault on our freedom than control over our cars being taken away from us.
Yeah, very true. And really, it's the algorithm that's running things. It looks like we now have algorithms running for political office disguised as humans. So now we have algorithms that basically run our car, tell us what to do. I mean, look, I have a habit of maybe cutting it a little close when I'm changing lanes and sometimes get a little too close to the person in front of me. And my car now, the nanny car, it starts beeping and flashing and everything else. And it's like, car, I have this under control. I don't need your input here. Thank you very much.
Sure, and that's highly subjective. If you're a person who has a good sense of spatial relationships, if you're a higher skilled driver, cutting it close, what does that mean? What we're seeing now is this technology being premised on your glaucomic old grandmother or senile grandpa, who has to have a half-mile clearance between himself and whatever object's up ahead. before he dares to execute a maneuver. And it's getting worse, by the way, not just the beeps. A lot of these cars now have what's called automated emergency braking. So if the car thinks you're cutting it too close, it will jam on the brakes and jam you forward in your seatbelt and almost give you the dashboard sandwich for lunch.
Yeah, I've noticed that the things like beeping and flashing, and another thing is the car tells me that I'm drowsy. All right, I just wake up in the morning, but it doesn't like the way I move my eyes, and it's putting up a coffee cup on the screen. What's with that?
Well, I had a new Subaru, a 2019 Ascent, I guess about a month or so ago, and it actually has facial recognition software in it, and it's the most sophisticated version of that system. And as you say, it monitors your eye movements, and if it thinks that somehow you've taken your eyes off of where it thinks you should have them, it will sound the klaxon and the lights go on and the flashing buzzers and all of that, even though it's entirely unnecessary. And ironically, in my opinion, these lights and these buzzers are creating a distraction and thereby creating a hazard. You're constantly being pestered by the car while you're trying to drive.
Yeah. Another thing that really annoys me is electronic steering, because the way cars drive now, Eric, and I think you'll agree, is you don't have a feel of the road at all. You're in this like cocoon-like thing, and it's kind of, it's nice not to feel potholes going over the road, getting jolted by them, I will say that. But you don't have a feel of the road. You don't really feel like you're controlling the car. You're giving input, and then the car is taking your input and going with it. It's a real disconnect that you're feeling from your vehicle these days.
Yeah, they're taking all of the pleasure out of all of the emotion and all of the visceral enjoyment out of driving. But more than that, they're also arguably, again, making the car less safe rather than more. These electronic steering systems sometimes will attempt to countermand your steering. The latest lane keep assist systems, for example, which try to keep the vehicle in the lane by judging its position relative to the painted lines on the road. Let's say that you try to pass a car, but you haven't turned on your signal first. The car will actually fight your attempt to pass and try to force you back into the opposite lane again. And it's a very disconcerting feeling. And for somebody who's not ready for it, somebody who's not a skilled driver might overreact, overcompensate, and run off the road as a result of this.
Yeah. And who appointed Detroit or Japan or Germany the keeper of my car, telling it what to do? I mean, I kind of like the lane assist, because on my Lexus, I would like to be able to just take my hands off the wheel, put them on my lap, and let the car just drive. But then I get a warning that my hands aren't on the steering wheel. So, and the car can do it, but I'm ready to jump in. If not, one thing I do like, I have to tell you, is adaptive cruise control, but there's no tailgating mode, because, I want to be closer than 8 car lengths from the car in front of me, but I can't do it. It won't allow me to get closer. I don't need to tailgate. I don't need to be on the guy's bumper, but a car length and a half, so that every car in the other lane can't cut me off, cut into the lane. It renders it useless.
Well, to get to your point, it used to be that the car companies designed and manufactured their vehicles to satisfy buyer demand. But there has been a co-option of the car industry by the government. By and large, there are exceptions. Fiat Chrysler is an exception. But by and large, the industry now works very closely with the government, does not really fight the government any longer, and in fact anticipates some of these mandates and encourages these mandates to be foisted off on the public. So my issue is not with the technology per se, it's that it's being forced on us from the top down. It is not a free market grassroots thing that's happening in response to legitimate market demand.
Hey, so what's interesting is, in spite of the government's intercession and dominance of the sector, you still managed to get 1,000 horsepower vehicles on the road.
Yes.
I mean, my car, it's a 6-cylinder V8. It's got 300 15 horsepower and 320 some odd pounds of torque. The car is fast. And, you know, that used to be something that was the dream of V8 performance. Now you have it on 4 cylinders and 6 cylinders. But the government killjoy, you know, buzzkill is going after that now too, right?
Yeah, it's one of the sad ironies of our time that never before have cars been so powerful and so capable, and yet there's so many ways to stymie the use of these things. I point out to people who don't know cars that well that if you got into a current mid-sized run-of-the-mill family sedan, let's say a Camry or a Honda Accord, those cars are quicker and faster than almost every supercar of the 70s and even into the 80s. With their optional engines, those cars will run to 60 in the mid-5 seconds, mid-high 5-second range.
That's fast.
Yeah, and they have top speeds well over 130 miles an hour. Very few cars, including all of the V8 muscle cars of the 60s and 70s, delivered anywhere near that kind of performance. And those that did were marginally drivable on the street. You know, you sat in the thing and it was going because of the big cam. You didn't have air conditioning. It tended to overheat. These cars are completely docile. Heck, I had last summer, Jeep sent me the Trackhawk. Are you familiar with the Trackhawk?
I assume that's some high-performance version of SRT.
Well, it's the Grand Cherokee with the Hellcat drivetrain. So it's got the supercharged Hemi V8 and 707 horsepower. 707 horsepower.
You need that in a Jeep to haul stuff around.
Yeah, of course you do. And the thing goes to 0 to 60 in a little over 3 seconds, if you can imagine that.
Yeah.
And it's as docile as an 89 Buick.
A Buick Electra.
Really.
Electra.
No exaggeration. You turn on the climate control, has the Beats audio system, it's got the heated seats, every luxury amenity that you'd want. But when you floor it, it's almost as fast as a Nextel Cup stock car. Yeah.
Oh, it's remarkable. So that's one area where the consumer is really getting what they want. One thing I want to address with you is the revamping of the global audio industry. Evidently, nobody wants to drive sedans anymore, other than people who are in the latter part of their life and needed to commute back and forth to the nursing home. But otherwise, people are opting for SUVs, which I think are okay. I've had God knows how many of them over the years. But at this point, I like my convertible. And this is globally, it's taking place, not just in the U.S. It started here in the U.S. Where is this going to end? Because GM, Ford, Chrysler are going to basically stop making all passenger cars, except for muscle cars and a few select models. Mercedes and the rest, I assume, are really going to follow suit.
Well, I doubt it, actually, with regard to Mercedes. And here's another interesting consequence of the government. The reason that sedans, in my opinion, have become slow sellers is because they're generally small and not very useful as far as the mass market models go. To get anything big that has a trunk and can actually comfortably carry 6 people, you have to get into something like a Mercedes S-Class or an Audi A8, and now you're talking about a $100,000 car. And these big sedans, the reason they're almost exclusively luxury sedans now is because of the government's CAFE regs, the fuel economy regs, which resulted in the general downsizing of cars as well as the engines in those cars to increase the fuel economy.
Reducing weight, too, right? They reduced the weight and made them less safe.
That's right. Now, there was a loophole. It's no longer a loophole, but there was a loophole for so-called light trucks. And the manufacturers realized, hey, we can take a pickup truck and we can enclose the bed and put some seats on the floor, and voila, the SUV. And so that was the means by which the car industry responded to these CAFE regs and gave the buyer what they want, which is a large vehicle that has plenty of room, including room for cargo in the back. Most sedans now have very small trunks. Something like, let's say, a Camry or an Accord. Those cars have about a 15 or 16 cubic foot trunk. Very, very small. If you get into a crossover SUV or an SUV that has the same footprint as that, you'll probably have around 60 cubic feet of space. So that's really the main reason why people are switching over to these crossovers and SUVs. They want the room and they want the versatility, which has been taken away from them by the government.
Yeah, that's definitely the case of the government dictating your preferences and your choices. And then, as always happens, right, Eric? Always happens, regardless where it is, people find a way around it. And then the government is outraged. How dare you avoid our mandate? Who do you think you are? An individual, a free person, a free thinker, or something like that? We can't let this happen.
Odd that, we're supposedly living in a free country, and I know that that's kind of become a shop-worn cliche because it is. We don't live in a free country.
Right.
But if we lived in a free country, why is it the government's business at all what the fuel economy of our cars that we buy and the gas that we pay for is?
Good question. I'd like to know the answer to that one.
And there's also this false assumption that the market wouldn't fix this problem. That, the premise is that, well, if the government didn't mandate high fuel economy, the evil car cabal would offer nothing but, quote, gas-guzzling vehicles, which is, to me, a completely baffling position to take. If the market, if there were lots of people out there who were lining up with cash in hand and clamoring for high-efficiency cars, why wouldn't the industry build that?
Good question. The market. So, hey, let's talk about electric cars, because all I hear about, Eric, is electric vehicles taking over the planet, revolution. All right. Last year, 80 some odd million light trucks and autos were sold globally. And the number of electric pure EVs sold, I'm not talking hybrids, was a whopping 2 million. Does that sound like a revolution to you?
No, it's not. In the United States, I think it's roughly about 1% of all new vehicle sales. And it would be even less if you took away all of the massive subsidies and also the green mandates that are artificially increasing the very small demand for these vehicles, which are functionally and economically inferior to gasoline and diesel-powered cars.
Mm-hmm. So what about when you can get 500 or 1,000 miles per charge?
Well, let's say that's hypothetically possible, and that's a very hypothetically possible premise. But let's just say that it is. The other half of the equation, which I rant about frequently and which I don't hear too many other people discussing, I think is more important, and that is the recharge time. Mm-hmm. If you have to wait for a minimum of 30 to 45 minutes to refuel your vehicle, which is the case with electric cars, and that's if you have access to a fast charger, I think it's again baffling, demented, bizarre to imagine that our fast-paced fast food culture is going to put up with that. It's like imagining that McDonald's is going to say, "Okay, when you pull up to the drive-thru and order your Big Mac, we'll get it to you in about 45 minutes." You can refuel your car, your regular car, your non-electric car, literally in 5 minutes. Who's going to put up with that? It's crazy.
Yeah, nobody's, and that's the whole problem with it. It's good for old people in Palm Beach County where I live because they don't drive more than 10 or 20 miles a day. They plug it in the garage. They've spent the money for the quick charger and fine. But, the other flip side of this is the distortion of markets that where there are no electric vehicles would be much different, like batteries. Lithium is like $15,000 a ton now because everybody's expecting these electric vehicles to take off. And really, look, I will admit I like the quiet of a Tesla, even though I find it gets a lot more road noise than similar cars. And I think the technology's cool, but it isn't to the point where it's really that meaningful yet, is it?
No, of course not. And I think it's telling that Tesla touts the performance of its cars chiefly and how high-tech they are because they can't tout the economic sense.
Yeah, there are no economics.
Think about how we're losing the spontaneity and how we're being inconvenienced by electric cars. If I want to, when we're done with this interview, I can just go outside and jump in my car, and even if I'm running on fumes, I can roll down the road to the gas station and I can go about my business. Now, if I had an electric car and if I had forgotten to plug the thing in last night and I wanted to go somewhere and I went out to the garage and found that I only have 5% of charge left, well, I'm stuck at home now, aren't I? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very true. So,
and another thing that was very interesting, and I was heartened by the general press picking up on this, when we had that cold snap, I guess about a month ago, remember that?
Oh, yes, yeah.
And a
little
lot
bit of
problem. Tesla owners and people who had other brands of electric cars discovered that when it gets very cold outside, your battery range declines markedly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, little unintended, unexpected consequence of embracing this wonderful technology before its time. And it might very well be that electric cars do become dominant, but right now you got a government mandated subsidy to do it in most countries. I think it's going to expire in the U.S. at some point, but they keep extending it, and they have to pay you to buy these cars. Now, what is more immoral than subsidizing someone who's buying a $100,000 vehicle? Is that wrong?
I would have thought that would have stuck in people's craws. No matter where you fall on the political spectrum, it's one thing to say, okay, well, let's help the poor. Here's a guy who hasn't got a job, and he's barely making ends meet. Let's give him an EBT card and some welfare. It's quite another thing to literally help some millionaire San Fernando guy get into his $100,000 Tesla so he can virtue signal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Oh, I'm being so good. I'm helping the planet here, and you're helping me help the planet. What could be better, right?
Yeah, and by the way, almost all of those people, if you look into it, who have these Teslas, have another car that's not electric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because they need it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a second car, no question about that. So we've got all these paradoxes. And so many of them come because the government gets involved, sticks its nose under the tent where it doesn't belong, and then we wind up, right? Where we are now.
I've been accused of disliking EVs, and that's not the case at all. I dislike the artificiality of it. I think if an EV came along that was superior as a car, as a way to get around, I'd be all for that. And I think people would buy that, and that's great. That's the free market. That's people freely buying what meets their needs without being coerced, nudged, pushed, and without people's pockets being picked. My objection to the electric car isn't with the electric car. It's with the way it's being jammed down our throats with the subsidies and the mandates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. So we see this, that it's happening all over the place, and it's just another example of what we're going through here in society, the erosion of freedom, personal choice, being able to do what you want to do, when you want to do it, and the government is just there making sure that everything is done properly, right?
Well, yeah, and I think that if you really get down to the nitty-gritty, the reason ultimately that these EVs are being pushed so hard is because they are more amenable to being controlled by both the government and the corporate hive. A lot of people don't know that Teslas, for example, are always connected to the Tesla hive, receiving updates, and implicitly, Tesla is mining data, monitoring you. You might remember last fall during the hurricanes, Tesla just sent out a sort of a software blip that enabled people who had cars to go a little farther. They just extended the range by sending out some code, and that's fine. But it also makes you stop to think. Well, my car is constantly being monitored, and my data is being mined by these companies. I don't like that.
Definitely not. And so it shows you that if you don't make your car payment, can't you see the day when Tesla is going to just stop your car from working?
Sure. Now, in that context, I wouldn't have a problem with it. If you don't pay your bills, I think you're not entitled to keep driving your car. But they could also stop the car for any other reason. Let's say they impose a regime. You might remember back in the 70s where you had the odd and even days because of the energy crisis. So you weren't allowed to drive on certain days. So they could implement something like that just as easily using the same technology.
Yep. Easily. And, all these things they can do, and they can limit your range. They can limit your mileage. They can do all these things, limit your speed, which we've been talking about in Europe, right? Happens there. All these things can be done here. And we know that absolute power, is always abused, right? And they have absolute power. Even
if we're not talking about a Stalinist kind of a regime, what we're talking about is sort of this nannying, suffocating, busybody world in which you're constantly being nannied and busybodied by the government and the corporations anytime they think that you're doing something that deviates from what they decree to be safe or prudent. you're sort of nudged and prodded, and your range of action, your ability to make decisions is taken away from you. And implicit in this is that you're some kind of an idiot child that needs perpetual parenting, and it's an insulting kind of a doctrine.
Yeah, it really is. It's insulting. we could get into this like really pretty deep into the woods, but for sure, a lot of things are really just off the wall. Hey, so your website, just tell us where we find you again, Eric.
Oh, sure. It's www.epautos.com. And you can also, I think, if you just type in my name, Eric Peters Autos, it also takes you to the same place. All
right, cool. Eric Peters Autos. And we'll have a link to it in the show notes. As always, appreciate your coming on. And questions, comments on this, anything else you heard, email is kl@kerrylutz.com, Twitter feed @KerryLutz, Facebook, Financial Survival Network. If you're watching this on YouTube or you are listening on a podcast, please subscribe, like, and share. It really helps us a lot when you do it. Helps us get out ideas like Eric's where they're most needed to the largest number of people. Eric, been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on again.
Oh, thank you, Kerry. Look forward to doing it again.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.